There are titanic shifts happening in world politics as we record. Donald Trump is on a warpath with the European powers and the European leaders. He has threatened to annex Greenland, and he is simply humiliating all of Europe in the process. Earlier this week, we saw him release some screenshots of texts from Macron, some texts from the Norwegian Prime Minister. He also released his own tweet referencing Starmer as being completely stupid, which, no, fair enough. I mean, Trump is ripping up the rules-based order, he's ripping up the playbook, and he's just bulldozing his way through Europe right now. So, welcome back to A World on Fire. My name is Fiona and Khaled. I'm joined with Khaled Malachi.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. And yeah, did you see the texts?
I did see
Did you see what Trump was saying?
I did see the text
It's hard
this
to
weekend.
miss.
Very much so.
He wants us to see them.
Yes. And it's interesting, of course, because as soon as Trump announced that he wanted to annex Greenland and he was serious about this,
Yeah.
as part of the national security strategy that his team has been putting forward, the Europeans came out and in slightly different ways, they said this is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
But then he leaks the messages with Macron, where he's trying to schmooze Trump. He's saying, it's one thing for the cameras, and it's another thing in, Donald Trump's DMs, where he says to him, they're at the World Economic Forum now.
Yeah.
On Thursday, before you fly back, let's go get some food together. We can drink some wine in Paris and so on and so forth. And then for Trump to just release it, it's clearly there to make a political statement.
It's a power move.
It is a power move. And I feel like the biggest power move of the weekend was what he said to the Norwegian Prime Minister, where he said, since your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, even though it's ended up in his hands anyway, I no longer feel obliged to think purely of peace, as if that was ever what Donald Trump wanted to pursue. But right now, as we record this, Trump has just finished his mega speech at Davos.
You were watching it?
I was watching it. My eyes were glued to my computer screen. And I really wish I could have been a fly on the wall to see just how much he made the European leaders squirm.
Yeah.
And in this speech, one thing that struck out at me is he says, we want a piece of ice for world protection, and you guys won't give it to us. And then he enters into just this, it's almost like a comedy skit, where he just attacks and berates and belittles the European leaders. Macron got a shout out. We often say that Trump says the quiet bit out loud. Yeah. If people have seen footage of Davos, you might have seen Emmanuel Macron wearing shades. Yeah. And
like James Bond wannabe at it.
Yeah, something like that. Or an eye infection. Yeah. But when he gets up on stage, he says, President Macron, Emmanuel, what's going on with those glasses?
What the hell is that?
He is there literally to humiliate the European powers. And their response was very pathetic in the first instance. They say, you can't do this. You can't do this to Greenland. Why? It's not just because of the Greenlanders, but because of the Danes. The Kingdom of Denmark owns Greenland.
Yeah. I've not heard that phrase I don't know if I've heard that phrase a lot actually in the past, but the Kingdom of Denmark. Yes. I think that a lot of people probably in the last couple of weeks have been thinking, well, what is the significance of Greenland and what is the significance of Denmark and why are they in any way related? And when you look into the history, there's a real brutal history of Danish imperialism and colonialism in Greenland, with really brutal atrocities committed against the indigenous population there, forced sterilization, a whole host of really horrific things. And that is it's not the main story, of course, the main story in the mainstream media, which is, reflecting the interests of the so-called liberal world order, which is just offended on behalf of Denmark and its kingdom. But actually, what for us is important to highlight is, US imperialism, but also how it connects with the diminishing power that's diminished over many, many years of Europe and European imperialism, including of Denmark, right? And what they have wanted in Greenland, which is not just love and peace and friendship with the indigenous population there, but is also the resources and the strategic position that Greenland occupies.
For sure. And it's a continuation of just Trump's brazenness when it comes to why he wants things.
Yeah, he says the truth.
They were trying to repackage the Venezuela situation with Nicolas Maduro. They were trying to say, well, you know, this guy wasn't legitimate anyway, and so on and so forth. Trump and his gang would just say, no, we wanted the oil.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And it's so similar when it comes to Greenland as well. He says, this is a national security concern. There is trade opening up. There are resources there in the Western Hemisphere that we want to take. And the Europeans project weakness.
Yeah.
So they're not able to defend this. We want to defend this. He even says to the Danish premier, we will do a better job at this, right?
Yeah.
This is for NATO. This is the way that he justifies it. Yeah. And part of his speech was going on and on and on about the military prowess of the US. He's very happy that a fighter jet is going to be called the F-47 since he's the 47th president. And he says, if it's good, I'll take that. If it's bad, we're gonna scrap that title, whatever. All of this stuff.
Important things.
all the important things. It's a real ramble. But he did say something which I think was interesting. He said, we, of course, can use excessive force to get what we want. But we won't do that. You see, if you agree that we can own Greenland, then we would appreciate it a lot. But if you don't, it will be remembered. And it really reminded me of my favorite film, The Godfather, specifically part 1, where Vito Corleone says to a man that comes and asks for a request, you never wanted my friendship. You know? And I'm going to make you an offer that you can't refuse as well. I mean, it is total mafioso stuff, right?
He's just a gangster.
He is.
But he's showing off the power of the US military. I think probably also in response to the really just pathetic display from Europe when he first spoke about taking Greenland, and you had different European powers send over some soldiers. They sent some officers over. I think Germany sent 15. I think the Finns sent a bunch as well. And Britain, the United Kingdom, you know, that great power, sent one. They sent one officer to Greenland in solidarity with the Kingdom of Denmark. And it's just, there was a lot of jokes about this amongst ourselves and also online because, I mean, that's a really good display of the total shallowness also of the British military.
For sure.
But more importantly, Britain's role on the world stage, despite the fancy speeches that Starmer might do. And Starmer did do a speech on Monday, I think it was. You know, and it was a really serious speech where he was saying, you know, this is wrong what the US is trying to do, and that Greenland is for the Greenlanders and for the Kingdom of Denmark, and that this goes against our principles, which is ludicrous. Like, what are those principles? He's claiming self-determination, territorial integrity is a part of the principles of either the rules-based order or Britain, whilst at the same time, Britain has been obviously continually complicit in the genocide against the Palestinians, the total encroachment of the Palestinians' land against their own self-determination and their territorial integrity. But anyway, he made this big sort of speech, and in the media, they were kind of responding to it saying, well, you know, Starmer's being a lot more serious than he has been in the past. And these are real strong words. It's the epitome of, you know, when people make jokes about, you know, I'm going to write a strongly worded letter to Trump, and that's gonna change anything. I mean, it is true in a certain sense. There's a slight tonal shift in what he was saying in comparison to Trump's actions a bit in Venezuela and in other places where all he could really just say was international law. Here he's been
wait
slightly
for the facts. Wait for the facts.
Sorry, you're right. Here he is being slightly more explicit that he's opposed to what is taking place, as have, you know, the rest of Europe, and as have even like other more traditional Trump allies in Britain. Even Farage came out and was like, oh yeah, you know, I don't really agree with this or what's going on.
Piers Morgan as well.
And they're trying to, in their own way, attack Starmer for not really doing more, even though there has been a slight development in his position. But the truth is, there's not a lot they can say, because what can Britain actually do in response to Trump, given what Trump is saying, which is, I could take this militarily if I wanted to. You can't really stop me. What are you going to do? Send one more soldier over to Greenland?
Goes from 2 boots to 4 boots on the ground.
And by the way, at the same time, that deal over the Chagos Islands was stupid. I mean, like the whole situation is just very, very quickly unraveling, as we seem to discuss every single week, the fact that this isn't really about Starmer's own personal conviction. It's about him trying to manage Britain in an impossible situation, stuck between the US and Europe.
Yes, yeah. And it's worrying Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because when I think of Nigel Farage and Donald Trump, I always think of that tweet where he's holding up that little bottle of champagne and it says, "Happy birthday, Mr. President." Have you seen this tweet?
I don't think
this is from years and years ago when I had Twitter. And obviously, he is a bit of a Trump wannabe, right?
Yeah.
And for him, he came out and said that this flashpoint, what Greenland is becoming, represents the potential of the biggest fracture in the transatlantic alliance, the special relationship. And he also said, if we don't get past this, it would genuinely turn to a rupture. That's serious talk, right?
Yeah.
It shows panic and consternation for the man that's most likely to actually follow on from Starmer in the next elections. And the media has responded in a kind of weird way, I think because of what you said. Like Starmer, what would you do if you were Starmer's closest advisor in a moment like this?
How would you advise him?
How would you advise him? But one thing that's very interesting, and it's always the case with the Liberals, writing in The Guardian, I always find that they're almost waiting for Starmer to have his Love Actually moment. You know?
Yes.
With Hugh Grant up against his counterpart, and then he talks about all things that are great to be British. It's been Christmas. You've watched Love Actually
recently. I did watch it,
Yeah.
And he mentions the Beckhams
yes, he does.
in that speech.
He does.
And David Beckham is in Davos.
Yes.
So maybe David can advise Starmer
Maybe.
on... No, he's got his own problems at the moment.
But, you know, for the people in the press room on that Monday, when Starmer was saying things like, this is completely wrong, and there was this tonal shift that you were describing, they must have been thinking, yes, he's going to do it. He's going to do it. And then all of a sudden he pulls back and he says, actually, no, we need to be pragmatic.
Yeah.
We have serious trade agreements with America, security agreements. He even referenced the nuclear deterrent as well. And so he just retreats into being so meek because there's so little he can say. And he finds himself increasingly in this impossible situation. Yeah,
it's like his job is to remind people of the reality. As in, we've spoken in the past in podcasts and articles about how sometimes the ruling class can like delude themselves on their own lie.
Yes.
And there's definitely a wing of the British ruling class that does that in regards to the role they could play on the world stage. That is the class that the wing of the ruling class that pushed very hard for Brexit, famously, and thought they could go buccaneering around the world and redeclare an empire. But Starmer, his role as a prime minister and as a politician has been one to try and be a serious manager of this crisis. He's trying to have a bit of a moment there in the media by saying this is wrong because he's trying to hark back to a version of capitalism in the West where there was this rules-based order that they could use to be a lens through which they actually implemented imperialism all over the world.
Where they hid their intentions.
Repackaged it in a nice way so people could feel good about themselves. In comes Trump, bulldozes that and says, no, I'm not going to pretend that the rules-based order exists. It doesn't exist. America will do what it wants in its own way. And so then Starmer's in this, it makes Starmer look like a fool. But then actually in that moment, he is reminding, maybe whether it's Sky News or all these, kind of pundits who want Starmer to become this Churchill-like figure, that actually we can't do that. And he's also trying to say it to his own Labour backbenchers who are putting him under pressure to do what cannot be done within the confines of capitalism. And so that's the kind of, the interesting position that Starmer's in and whatever he believes. He's still, and Macron does it as well. Starmer's not the only one, of course, but we're in Britain. That's why we're talking about Britain. Where they're like just kind of, tearing their hair out that, Trump is destroying the rules. But the more they talk about the rules, the more they're actually exposing that they never existed in the first place.
For sure.
That's a really,
really important point because I would say that he's a very well-versed politician when it comes to the rules-based order.
Yeah, he was really built in a factory for politicians.
For sure. And
his voice is really weird as well.
Yeah, he sounds very robotic. But his bread and butter is talking about things like international law.
Yeah, well, he was a human rights lawyer.
Oh yeah, I didn't forget. And sovereignty and territorial integrity and all of the things that you mentioned. And Trump, the way that Trump acts, does not really allow him to say those lies.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult spot to be in.
Trump won't let anyone else pretend.
Yes. And on to the liberals, the point is, if Starmer were to defy US imperialism, he would find himself in a very, very difficult spot. What do I mean by that? It would threaten this special relationship.
Yeah.
Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yes.
But I think it's really important what you said about like the delusions of grandeur that still do persist amongst the British ruling class. But if we're to look at this as Marxists, we can say that Britain has suffered an ignominious decline in the last 100 years. And there's been certain parts of the 20th century which have really solidified, let's say, what Britain's role in the world is. Like, for instance, the Second World War, which, of course, Britain won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The economy was totally smashed. It was basically subsidized. The rebuilding of the country was subsidized by the United States. Why? Well, as we've discussed, I'm sure on past podcasts, there was this insurgent threat of the Soviet Union. And so Western Europe needed to almost act as a bulwark against the pressure of the Soviets. And in this post-war period, what we saw was the British ruling class begrudgingly realizing that they didn't rule the waves anymore. And ultimately, they found a role within this new world order that was put together by the Americans, one where all of the key institutions, we should say, of the liberal world order, whether that be, on the economic side, the World Trade Organization, the Bretton Woods Agreement, on the diplomatic side, the United Nations, but also on the military side as well with NATO, all of this was put together. And I would say the British ruling class almost turned this necessity of like looking reality in the face and seeing what their relationship to the world was into a virtue. And I think this is what's been hidden and concealed behind the special relationship for 80 years now. And this is what's kind of crumbling around Starmer at the moment.
Yeah. And we obviously did a whole podcast episode looking at the kind of this idea of, is neoliberalism dead? And how Britain today in 2026 and why it's in this kind of weird position. And it's worth just recapping that, right? What happens in the 80s, where with Margaret Thatcher in particular, you see this kind of supercharged moment of privatization, deregulation, a complete abandonment of investing in any manufacturing. Yes. How is it that Britain's economy has transformed into just focusing on finance and consultancy and nothing really productive in that sense? How Britain's economy has grown to be completely dominated by the US and actually US capital and US companies that own essentially huge parts of Britain's economy. It's not even British owned businesses that monopolize Britain in that sense. And Thatcher's role in it and selling off, state assets and everything that has done in Britain with the British ruling class becoming obsessed with, trying to find money quickly, cheap money, easy money is a kind of way to summarize that whole process. And that has led Britain to being completely, this special relationship isn't just an ideological one where it's like, oh, we agree with the Americans, we've got the same language, or anything like this. It's an economic one and it's a military one, right? As the British economy has become more and more owned by the US, essentially, we have militarily become completely dependent on the US in terms of, our nuclear deterrence, security things. And so it's not always been conscious from the point of view of the ruling class, the decisions that are made. There's a logic that has developed through capitalism that has expressed itself in a particular way in Britain where, it isn't actually in any real meaningful way an independent power. That's why when the US goes to war with a country, Britain sends off a naval ship to support it, or sends one soldier, 2 boots to Greenland. It's because we're completely military, economically intertwined with, or not intertwined, rather, dependent. That's the point. There's a subservient relationship there.
Yes.
So it's not special, it's just subservient.
Yeah, it's like that of a master and his servant.
Yeah.
And
we're literally the butler.
Yes.
We're the butler in the world economy. That's also like literally the role that British capitalism plays in terms of only being based in kind of financing, but then also to the US.
Yes. Yeah, and I think as well, the British ruling class have laboured under the illusion that their relationship is a little bit more special than that of the French and the Germans.
Yeah.
For the last couple of decades.
They love that.
And
Farage says that's because of Brexit, by the way.
Okay. I'm thinking about the role that Britain played within the European Union before Brexit as a Trojan horse of American interests into Europe.
Yeah.
And that was something that always would annoy the European powers, like especially France. There's a kind of romantic idea, especially in the early noughties, after the war on terror was declared. You know, the Blair Bush years of it's like a band of brothers getting together and invading this country, turning this country to a failed state, and so on and so forth. It felt very much, I think, for the British ruling class as if they were a key and essential part of this new world order.
Yeah.
Which they are not. And I think what it did is it's conditioned this kind of, it's not just Starmer who's delusional, that really thinks that there's something special there, you know, something to be savoured with the Americans, and that's why they have to do everything that they can. I think it has really become ingrained in the psychology of the British ruling class, where it's almost a conditioned response of whatever the US does, we'll go with it.
We do, yeah.
And now with Trump and even the Venezuela stuff, we spoke in the last podcast about how operationally Britain did really nothing, but the way that Starmer would speak was we were there in spirit, you know? We were cheering you guys on, but we didn't like how you did it. We didn't like how you did it.
He's trying to prove almost as if we knew, but we didn't know, because both things are it's good and bad to have been involved in that for different reasons.
For sure. And I think this is the benefit of this kind of umbrella of let's say this phrase, the special relationship. What Britain's closeness and civility, as you said, to the United States has allowed is Britain to play an outsized role in world politics, to almost shield it from its decline, and to basically throw its weight around on the world stage. And I think this arrangement kind of suited the British ruling class. You know, they might have thought in the 50s and the 60s, okay, we're not number one anymore, but we're number two, right? Yeah. You know, we're the guys. we go where the Americans take us. But now, seemingly, all of this is finished, and it really brings to mind actually the very wise words of a British Lord Palmerston, where he said, "No nation has permanent allies, just permanent interests." And I think when trying to explain what Trump is up to and why he's acting the way that he does, I think he's recognized the fact that the European ruling classes cannot get their heads around, which is they are not that significant anymore. Yes. Though they like to pretend to be almost in the control room as the masters of the universe, the great defenders of the liberal world order, they are just diminished powers that have very little say and certainly can't stand on their own 2 feet without the Americans.
Yeah, but at the same time, Trump has he's seen the weakness in Europe, but he also recognizes, although he wouldn't describe it as weakness, he recognizes a certain limit to what the US can, or probably in his mind should do on the world stage. And that is basically not to be the world's policeman in any way, shape or form. And obviously a huge part of his election campaign was of America First, which also suggested coming out of any and all conflicts. One of the main ones being the war in Ukraine. And obviously famously was saying that he would get that solved immediately.
24 hours.
In 24 hours. And that has not been the case at all. We are over a year now into Trump's presidency, and it hasn't ended. Although we can say from a broad perspective that NATO has lost in terms of what it wanted to achieve in the total pushback of Russia. But the trying to detangle the US specifically from the war in Ukraine, Trump has found very, very difficult. And there's a limit to what he's been able to do. But at the same time, then he does these other kind of dramatic displays of strength, whether it's, kidnapping Maduro or, bombing Iran, or all of these kind of different things that he's done in a they look like they're these massive, spectacular displays of strength, but they're also a recognition that they can't do things how they used to in the past. I think something that was like a real clear example of that was also like the fall of Afghanistan, right? When, you had all these US forces and the embassies suddenly like rushing out. It was this massive display of the complete limit that US imperialism has found on the world stage. And so Trump has been trying to realign that. And as we've said before, Trump's quite honest about what he thinks. You can hear it in his speeches, but it's also laid out in their national security strategy document, right? Yes. It says very, very explicitly, we need to focus on our main rivals, which is China, and making sure that we have domination over our spheres of influence, securing that, which also explains why he's interested in Greenland and trying to push China and Russia actually a little bit out of Greenland. And that's what he wants to focus on. We can't do everything else all around the world. And it's important for us to remember that as the main way to know the logic of where Trump is going. Because if you just take the spectacle of everything, it looks like he's trying to do like bomb Nigeria, all of these different things. But actually that reaffirm US imperialism's role in their main spheres of influence and push China back, that is Trump's kind of, that's his goal.
And this is something the Europeans cannot handle, because when he says that this is a reprioritization of what the United States wants to get up to, what he's essentially saying is other big powers can have their backyards too.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that they can't deal with, because what does that mean about Russia?
Yeah.
A resurgent Russia in Europe, with its eyes on Eastern Europe, and all of the spheres of influence it had 30 years ago that was steadily encroached upon by the EU, by German imperialism. That's what they feel very threatened by. And I think it's important to give this context, because sometimes when you read the liberal papers, which I don't recommend any of our viewers do, but in preparation of podcasts like this, I do have to read The Guardian. And I read this absolutely wild article. I sent it to you a couple of days ago. I can't remember the headline. It was something like, Starmer is trying to be peaceful and work through diplomatic ways with Trump and this sort of thing, but he's assuming that Donald Trump is a sentient being.
Yes.
What the hell does that mean? And I've got a quote from this article, which is, I'm not even sure if you could call it analysis. He says, "The Donald is a bully who enjoys using his power on those weaker than him. He doesn't care about NATO and other global alliances. Everything is about machismo. And he doesn't need a reason for taking Greenland other than he quite fancies it. Because he can. Because he likes the attention." I mean, it's ridiculous. It's all about personality in this way,
it doesn't explain anything. It's like, and the Liberals did this the first time round in the first Trump presidency, and the fact that they're still doing it is extra. They're basically saying, and they don't just do it about Trump. They do it, but they're saying he's got small dick energy, and that's why he is, he just has to prove himself, and that's why he wants the Peace Prize and all this kind of stuff. It explains nothing about the world in 2026 to suggest that the threatened annexation of Greenland is all to do with Trump's personality. That's not the case at all. And they do it with other people as well. They do it with Putin. In general, we should be wary, or you should be wary of bourgeois history that is explained through just individuals.
Yes.
Obviously, we recognize that individuals and personalities can play a massive role in politics. Like, we spend a lot of time talking about how what Trump says and does has an impact, but it's not the fundamental driving force for why there are massive tectonic shifts. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Tectonic shifts. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, tectonic shifts in world relations.
In world relations. Okay, sorry, I'm losing my mind thinking about Trump. It's not enough. It's not enough to explain it in that way. And it is worth us just going over, well, what is the significance of Greenland?
Yes, we should.
And it's for two reasons. First of all, part of the reason why people are now even able to go into Greenland is the result of climate change, which is melting the ice in that whole area. So one of the things that a lot of different imperialist powers are interested in is a new trade route that is opening up in that whole region and across the Arctic, basically. But for a long time, it hasn't just appeared on the minds of people like, oh, there's a interesting territory there with some rare earth materials that we could use. No, there have been different competing imperialist powers, including Denmark and loads of the Scandinavian countries, Norway, and who have been trying to have their own interest in Greenland for a long time because of these resources and because of where it is. That also includes Russia. That also includes China. And what Trump is trying to do is push Russia and China out of that, out of Greenland, because one of the problems that he has is that China and Russia have actually been cooperating specifically in regards to Greenland and trying to make the most out of it. And so Trump's logic is not just his kind of mad personality, but he's thinking, all right, in my first administration, I tried your way. Your way is in like the way that the liberals would prefer things to go wrong, which is kind of negotiation and treaties and all this kind of stuff. And the US has been on, I don't know what it's called exactly, I can't remember, but like committees in the Arctic, which manage the area and look into it and think about the defense and all of this kind of stuff. That hasn't helped him kick China and Russia out. And so this time round, he's thinking, I don't want to waste time with this. I just want to go a lot further and threaten the use of the military in order to maintain what I want. And so I think it's not really what we've got to look at. It's kind of a bit of a lie for European powers or liberals to suggest that Trump is doing something that they would never do. The reason that they're so angry at Trump is, one, because he reveals the truth of imperialism more broadly, but also because he has the strength to do it because of the US economy. He has the strength to threaten the use of the military to take Greenland. If Denmark could do that, they probably would, as would any other imperialist power. Because what governs the motivations of these people is no idea of democracy. It's no ideology. It's just their own economic and political interests.
Yes, for sure. And when he says, I think it was actually his Secretary of Trade that said this, Europeans project weakness, whereas the US can project strength on matters of security vis-a-vis Greenland. What he's referencing is the fact that whoever has military bases on Greenland will basically be in a more optimal situation if, for instance, a war were to break out between the United States and Russia. And there has been a race to the Arctic, this Arctic race, for decades. And I think what Trump is realizing is the US kind of fell asleep at the wheel, even though it was part of their sphere of influence. And, you know, he
Sleepy
says,
Joe.
Sleepy Joe, that guy. All problems start with him.
Why are we in Ukraine? We should have been over there.
According to Trump. Yeah. And he's been asleep, and they haven't really thought about what potential problems this will bring. Russia has the strongest military presence in the Arctic. It actually far outstrips the technological and military equipment that the United States have. Russia has one of the largest submarine fleets, including 16 nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. And actually, I read this in an article we produced last year, that military experts in the West have estimated that it could take up to 10 years of military investment for NATO Arctic states to catch up with Russian capabilities in the region. This is something specifically that Trump did highlight in his Davos speech. He says, the Danes said that they were actually going to put money into this. They didn't. We will. This is why it's for NATO in his own bizarre way. And I think that deals with the one side of like why he's acting in this very brash way, right? He's saying you're all useless, basically. You know, I'm the big boy and I'm going to come in and have my way. But I think there is another side to explain some of Trump's more erratic behavior, let's say. And that's the fact that he has failed on all of his election promises to the working class in America. This is the other side of the process, if you like, because what was the key economy? What was the I'm giving it
Spoiler.
away? What was the key issue that he ran on? It was the economy, and it's very clear that he's not happy with where the economy is. He's making all of these braggadocious claims and this sort of thing, but ordinary Americans can see that life hasn't actually improved. All of their material concerns, which Trump elevated through his election pitch and actually started to kind of tap into, all of those concerns have intensified, right? About the future of American jobs and so on. I was doing some research before, and it's clear that inflation has remained stubborn over the year 2025. In 2026, the projections are for it to rise. I remember as well last year, it was around the time we were at the RCP summer camp, the news breaking that Trump had fired like the chief economic data analyst because he didn't like the numbers. And the numbers that were released were, they'd revised down all of their employment growth figures. And in fact, if you exclude the pandemic, job employment figures, the growth of those, had never been as bad since 1979. That's pretty significant. You think about what he was saying at the time. We're going to bring back a renaissance of American manufacturing. He made all of these huge promises, raised all of these hopes. But I think what we can see is Trump is presiding over a dying empire. He is he's the man in charge, whilst the US is in relative decline. And he's clearly getting more and more frustrated as well. You know, he looks at the Europeans, he's like, he lets it all out, right? He's thrashing around and shouting and screaming and this kind of thing. But I think this is really a big part behind his actions. If you're trying to understand Donald Trump, I can't understand. I can't understand every tweet that this man makes.
And you're a smart guy. So we're not.
I think anyone would struggle to understand it. He's very mercurial. He's unpredictable. But I think this is the context really helps explain the big spectacles, right? The shock and awe operation in Venezuela, the capture of Nicolas Maduro, an easy win for his base, right? But you can see with this confidence can come arrogance very quickly.
For sure.
And I think this is what we've actually seen in America with the ICE raids, these terror gangs being on the streets, the shooting of Rennie Good. You can see that he's trying to act tough, but there is the possibility of this backfiring in a big way.
Obviously, it's important for us to explain what's happening in world relations and the breakdown of world relations, whilst also understanding the mood in the working class, particularly in America, which is one aspect of this whole process that you will not find discussed, definitely not in the bourgeois media. And as you say, part of his dramatic, spectacular actions outside of the US are kind of to try and distract from the internal crisis. And we would say that the constant fracturing that there is in his MAGA base, but also more broadly in the working class. We saw that a bit over the Epstein files. Clearly, there was so much anger brewing over that. And it seems to always be rising to a certain point, and then something dramatic happens which distracts from it. I don't think he can ignore it. I think it's going to keep coming back. But yeah, I think this thing I said earlier about deluding yourself through your own lies and your own power, Trump and the Trump administration will be the clearest example of this. And I think the killing of Renee Good, a woman who was in Minneapolis, who was shot just like in the face by an ICE thug, an ICE agent, that it was captured on video, that was shocking enough to many people, caused a huge backlash. But not just the event in and of itself, it was the subsequent defense of that ICE agent by J.D. Vance and Trump, and the lengths that they went to say that actually she was trying to shoot him. I mean, it was grotesque, and it really, really, I think, has caused a lot of revulsion. And there was huge protests in response to that. And I also saw yesterday that the AFL-CIO, I want to say, has endorsed for a general strike, basically, to take place on Friday. Obviously, we'll see what happens. We'll see the scale of response. but in order to kick ICE out. And that is a massive mood that is developing in a lot of neighborhoods across the US, which is very, very significant. ICE is obviously an institution of the state. It's a key, I would say, ideological pillar of Trump's administration. But ICE has been around. ICE is not specific to Trump. ICE existed pre-Trump, and there have been thuggish, horrific, huge deportations under Biden, under Obama. It's not, specific to ICE or specific to Trump or the Republicans. But the point is, this is reaching a bit of a tipping point, I think, for people, and a huge backlash is being prepared. If there actually is a strike, that would be phenomenal. And this is the perspective that our, US comrades have put out, and they have an article, talking about this, to fight ICE with class struggle, that workers can unite on that basis. And if a mood for that exists, as this trade union is recognizing in some form, then I think that shows, the potential for class struggle in the US, which has the power to bring down Trump, which is very significant.
Yes, for sure. And to bring it all back around, then we've looked at both sides of the process: the pressure he's feeling from the working class at home, and the pressure he's also feeling from encroaching Russia into the Arctic, and the pressure he's feeling also from China in Latin America as well. You can see that I feel like he's almost sadistic when it comes to the European leaders, or he's being, though he holds the highest office in the land, the United States of America, the foremost imperialist power, he feels like maybe he can't do any right in a way. And he's kind of like, it's very empirical the way that he operates. So enter Keir Starmer. Let's talk about his tweet to Keir Starmer. About the Chagos Islands.
Yeah, it was really amazing, this tweet, which he starts with this kind of dripping with sarcasm. He even references, the United Kingdom, which is supposed to be our brilliant ally,
our brilliant
with
friend,
quotation marks around the word brilliant, which is good because, again, he's just exposing. It's like he allows people to pretend that they're more important than they are, and he's definitely allowed Starmer to kind of parrot himself as being a part of this special relationship. When he just, because he was annoyed at Trump's speech where he's kind of saying, oh, this is a bit wrong, he released this statement slamming Starmer for being stupid over giving away the Chagos Islands, which is something that happened a couple of months ago. This is kind of, it's not like a year old. I can't remember when it was first being discussed, which is the Chagos Islands, which Starmer has agreed, which he said on the basis of international law, to give back to Mauritius. And Trump is very unhappy about this because it's a military base that the US uses. And so Starmer ended up negotiating this deal where he said, okay, we're just giving it back to Mauritius. But actually, he's going to continue, and Britain is going to continue to pay £100 million a year for
99 years.
For 99 years, which is extraordinary. I think the total amount that Britain is going to pay is something like £3.5 billion, just for the US to continue to use this base, despite the fact that they are actually giving...
That they used to bomb Iraq.
Despite the fact that they are, ostensibly giving this island back to Mauritius. What on earth does Britain or Starmer get out of that? Nothing. Yes. And so Trump, used this moment, I guess, just to remind the world and to really attack Starmer over this. And again, what can Starmer say in response?
Yes.
Nothing.
When Trump speaks about the Europeans, he very much takes this tone of like, I've done all of this stuff for you, and you won't even give me Greenland.
Yeah.
And I feel like there is an element of delusion within this, because actually, when you think about it, before the Ukraine war broke out, Britain was banging the war drum, but actually many different European powers, specifically France and Germany, did not want to go for basically things to escalate and a hot war. What was a Cold War to turn into a hot war with Russia? They're actually very reticent to they were actually saying to the British, like, can you guys quieten down a little bit, like pipe down, like stop trying to basically cause this proxy war to happen. But since that point, America has put a lot of pressure on Europe to get as involved and get as stuck in as they can. billions and billions of euros have been thrown at this black hole that is the Ukraine war, which we should actually specify was a war provoked by the United States against Russia in order to weaken and cripple it. Right at the beginning, this wasn't under the Trump administration, Biden would joke about how he was going to turn the ruble to rubble. The people in the US administration would talk about how Russia was just a gas station masquerading as a country. They come out with all of this crap, and they really were drunk on their own arrogance and this idea that they could just smash Russia. People were even talking at the time about not just pushing back Russian forces, but actually marching on Moscow. This is the kind of delusional world that these people lived in. Anyway, the bitter irony now is the Europeans feel most exposed, and as Trump is trying to extricate himself from this war, they are trying to entangle him further and further in a war that the United States began, that it provoked in the first place. So they have thrown their lot in behind the Ukraine war. If you go back to last summer as well, when tariff became Donald Trump's favorite word in the English language.
Beautiful tariffs.
When the US said, we're going to slap 15% tariffs on EU goods, the Europeans actually just turned the other cheek. They said, yeah, okay, that's fine. We won't retaliate. And what I'd put this in a broader context of the Europeans are very good at trying to sanitize US war crimes. Sometimes they make a little bit more noise, sometimes they don't. Yeah. But in truth, it's America's relationship with Israel which has determined the response to the Gaza genocide for all of the European powers, especially Britain as well. When he bombs Iran, or when he invades and kidnaps the head of state of Venezuela, all of these different types of things. It's not as if the Europeans haven't done their end of the bargain. It's not as if it's just, Trump magnanimously saying, here's all of this money. They do their bit. And it's actually bringing people in Europe out against their own rulers. Because what did the Ukraine war provoke? A huge cost of living crisis that still is biting in 2026. And so there's a line in an article that was written by our comrade Adam Booth, which I think summarizes this section of the podcast very well. He says, militarily, economically, and politically then, the European leaders have prostrated themselves before their American overlords, yet all of their civility and appeasement has yielded precisely nothing. In fact, it has left Europe and its political representatives in a far worse position, broke and broken. I think that summarizes it very, very well.
Yeah, it summarizes Britain's role on the world stage as trying to face in all directions, right? He's trying to maintain a special relationship with Trump in the US, whilst also trying to maintain a relationship with Europe, which was already fractured when this act of self-harm to the British economy took place in the form of Brexit, where Britain cut itself off from one of its biggest trading blocs that it had. And so it's like we how we've described it before. It's like he's got one foot in the US, one foot in Europe, and there's a rupture that is taking place.
A
very painful act of acrobatics is happening somewhere, and we're gaining. I say we, I mean from the point of view of the ruling class and British capitalism, is not it. I think maybe Starmer thought it's like these people think I can be so clever and strike up a deal with everyone, and I'm actually gonna somehow come out of this on top, and then he slowly realized like, oh no, I've actually coming out with very little at all, and whilst the kind of good news from the point of view of British capitalism is it's not just Britain that's coming out of this in a bad way. What we are witnessing is the rupture of even a large part of NATO potentially itself. And even like within Europe now, all of these different countries are starting to think we need to put ourselves first, right? We've all bought into the idea of the EU, of NATO. A
collective West as well, right?
A collective West, which only worked when Trump, or not just Trump, but when the US was able to militarily keep it all together and secure it and finance a lot of it. If America is not going to do that, not only not do it, but actually considers Europe not an ally, but not necessarily an enemy, but I'm not going to put anything into you.
An economic rival when it comes to the European Union.
In that case, then for these European countries, their best interest is, fuck the lot of you, we've got to start prioritizing ourselves.
Yes.
Which will, accelerate,
the fragmentation of Europe. I think that's what It's a process that has already begun.
Yeah.
And in the midst of this, I think a question that's being asked a lot is, will NATO survive? It's kind of hanging in the air. And I've been thinking about this a lot over the last couple of weeks. I think the better question to ask is, what is left of NATO? When you have the big power more willing to negotiate with a non-NATO member, Russia, actually slapping down the Europeans every time they come together and they start talking about coalitions of the willing and security backstops and this kind of thing, what's left of this agreement to begin with? When you have the biggest power, the United States, saying quite openly at Davos, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Greenland is mine.
Yeah.
I will own it.
Yeah.
By hook or by crook. I won't even need to use my military force.
All this serves to do is put Starmer in particular in a tighter and tighter position, which is just going to produce anger. It's going to produce anger in his own party, but more importantly in young people, in the working class. And what's very important for us as communists is that we can explain it, not through Starmer's weak personality, but through British capitalism's diminished role in the world stage and Starmer's attempts at just managing that and holding on to it, even though it's like falling apart in his fingers.
Yes, for sure. All the old certainties are gone. And I would say that the institutions that were built up in the post-war period do not serve the same use for the United States anymore. So it's not so much a question of like, is NATO just going to disband? Is it going to be very dramatic and this sort of thing? You can imagine it just becoming a bit blunt, it becoming a blunt instrument. In fact, Trump that maybe put out statements, maybe condemning different aspects of NATO, right? You know, but what can they do? You know, if these institutions don't work in the interest of the United States, they will be pushed to one side, as they have been in the past. And I think right now it's very clear that Trump kind of used these things as annoyances, right? You know, it's like flies in the ointment. They're not as useful as they once were. But I think you're completely right that Starmer is trapped in this situation, and Britain looks weaker than ever as the world fractures into these rival blocs. And British foreign policy is based on facing in all directions at all times. And there's a lot of confusion in the news. I sent you something yesterday. A GB News clip.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
In this clip, one of their presenters is saying, well, look, the world is fracturing at the moment, and there are rival blocs, and we would rather be with the US in all of this. Europe is weak and pathetic, but we have this special thing going on with the US. And there was a clip response from a pundit with Navarro Media that says, this is unpatriotic.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's a completely crazy approach to what's taking place in the world today. It's completely detached from the class struggle.
Yeah.
You know, the material impact that this is going to have on ordinary people's lives.
Yeah.
And I think this whole thing of like, which side should we pick? Are we with the US or with Europe? Who's, you know, who's going to look after us better? Or even this delusion of like, we're going to chart our own course. We're going to be independent. We're going to rule the waves, all of this stuff. It feels so detached from reality. And I think people are kind of getting fed up with it.
Yeah, very fed up. Why should, like, focusing on whether Starmer is being patriotic or not, to whom, on what basis, and on what class basis? This is the whole point. And what is the mood in the working class in Britain right now? It's so detached, and actually, you know, it's what makes people put all of the left in with, you know, you're all part of one establishment, it's all rotten. And I think it's a real mistake that the left often makes, you know, when there isn't an obvious struggle taking place, class struggle that they can base themselves on, then it's very easy to fall into demoralization, because at the moment, we've spoken about this a bit in the podcast, it feels just like the right is winning all the time. And you've got reactionaries in power like Trump, you've got reactionaries like Farage that are growing in the polls, and therefore all we can do is just try and appeal to the lowest common denominator, or like, oh, patriotism. Oh, you know, the working class in Britain likes Farage at the moment. We've got to prove that Starmer isn't actually being patriotic. Rather than basing yourself on the real class anger that still exists in Britain, that is not always going to be expressed through Parliament, but actually in on the streets or in social life. There was this poll, right, that came out about predictions that British people have for this year. And it said like 3/4 of people predict an uprising could take place.
Yes.
Is that right?
Social unrest.
Social unrest. Also that England would win the World Cup.
Yes, which will not happen.
Swings and roundabouts.
But you're right. I think it's very important as communists for us to focus on the consequences of this this new world disorder and focus a little bit on what it means for Britain to be so weak on the world stage. And you can see this already with industries like steel in the UK that have been gutted by global competition. There's been massive job losses, tens of thousands of job losses in key industries as they're kind of just picked apart or asset stripped and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
As Britain becomes weaker, more of our public services are going to be opened up to privatization. You can already see the vultures around the NHS as things are. And obviously the most obvious example is the cuts to social spending in order to fund increased militarism.
Yeah.
I mean, one response to everything that's been happening in the news is something that Kemi Badenoch said, who is the leader of the Tory party, if people don't know. You would be excused for not knowing. But she says something very interesting, which is Britain needs to beef up its own defences. Otherwise, we will end up as poodles, as the US annexes Greenland, and we're slapped with tariffs because we haven't shown any strength.
Too late, girl.
Too late. And it shows actually just how aloof, no matter where you're coming from at the top, you know, with the ruling class, just how aloof the whole political establishment is. As you've been describing, Starmer's clinging on to the last 80 years.
Yeah.
Kemi Badenoch and other people are clinging on to a time even before that, right? Of empire where we are going to show the United States
strength
with our strength, and we'll show them we mean business and this kind of thing. Yeah. But there are serious splits at the top. And I think this underlines this point for us, that this breakup of the old world order is the breakup of the imperialist world order. This is a system that's dripping from head to toe with blood, with plunder, exploitation, and who can basically, the struggle for world hegemony is who will rule the world. This is having a very big impact and will continue to have a huge impact on the class struggle here in Britain.
Yeah, and that class struggle is brewing and is taking place, and there's a process that is ongoing, right? A real mistake of the left right now would be to take everything that is happening and just like accept the power. I mean, what I mean by that is I think there is this sense of demoralization. One, we've seen the total, utter collapse of your party, which I probably shouldn't have even mentioned. But I think that did have a demoralizing impact on the left. Obviously, we've seen the surge in the Greens to a certain degree. But also, this has meant that in the last few months, I think the British government has felt a bit more confident to go on the offensive. For example, over the last 2 months, over December and January, hunger strikes have been taking place in British prisons over the prescription of Palestine Action, and activists that are linked to Palestine Action who have been in prison for months and months and months without a trial. And they have gone on hunger strike, and some of them reached up to 67, 68, I think even 70 days. And there's another hunger strike taking place. And the government have done absolutely nothing, completely refused to meet with the hunger strikers. They obviously feel confident enough to ignore the entire movement.
Yes.
At the same time, it was announced in the last few weeks that the government are also going to lift their ban on certain arms sales to Israel, which was a huge aspect of the Palestine movement over the last 2 years. So the government in Britain, you know, despite its kind of weird position on the world stage, is feeling confident that in regards to Palestine in particular, they've gone past the most militant part of the movement. But I don't think that's a given.
Yeah, and look, I don't think, for instance, that you know, if the United States were to invade Greenland, or if the United States were to actually go ahead with its threats to other Latin American heads of states, we would see perhaps the scale of protest we saw for Palestine.
Yeah.
There might not be that direct line, and in some cases, there might not be that direct correlation of like, Britain is doing something evil, and so I'm going to come out, and that kind of moral repulsion, and then it brings out all of these different layers. But I think what we can say with the fracturing of the world situation, this crisis is going to filter through in many, many different ways. One example that just comes to mind is if Trump, if Starmer accepted Trump's offer to join this board of peace, he would have to pay $1 billion, right?
It's extraordinary.
If you could imagine as well, like with the slashing of social spending, the attacks to welfare, the course closures on campuses, all of this stuff, it gives the impression of a system in total crisis. So all of this instability and volatility that exists within the world is going to have an impact on consciousness, on how people think, and about their reality as, you know, young students looking at the world and thinking, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah. And I think people often assume that as communists, the one thing that we focus on is economic questions, wages, conditions. And of course, that is vitally important. And we spend a lot of time and material examining that and the scales of inequality. But we should also say that people shouldn't underestimate the ideological impact of this questioning of these institutions, of the status quo, that is taking place right now, that has come about through seemingly non-economic means, right? Or non-economic questions, although it all kind of lands back over the question of imperialism, for example, of course, has economic roots. But this stuff about the UN, the status quo, Palestine, there's an ideological questioning, the liberal world order, what do these institutions represent? That is the consequence of all of the pantomime of Trump and Starmer right now. And that means people will be looking for answers and alternatives, which is exactly what we are trying to provide.
Yes, for sure, for sure. And I'd say it's only through communism that you're able to really understand the objective processes taking place. So it doesn't just become a fairy tale about this personality clashing with that personality. And it's only really on the basis of an understanding that you'd be able to act. Yeah. So that's obviously why we do this podcast, why we're putting on a string of meetings now. University terms are starting all across the country, explaining matters like Venezuela, Trumpism, what it represents, and imperialist barbarism like Sudan. We've got loads of meetings coming up in London and Sudan. So that understanding is so essential, and I think that's what people are looking for. That's the impression that I've got from selling the paper at the start of this year. That anger does exist, that radicalization is taking place, and it will find an expression.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And I want to say thank you so much to everyone who's listened to this episode. If you want to hear more of our answers, then you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify as well, and check out everything else that we've spoken about over the last 10 episodes. I'm Fiona Lally. This has been A World on Fire.
I'm Khaled Malachi. See you soon to discuss A World on Fire.
See you next time.